Bonjour and welcome, everyone.
Good morning.
My fellow co-sponsors of this conference, which include the Humanitarian Coalition, which, as most of you know, is a consortium of Plan Canada, Care Canada, Oxfam Canada, Oxfam Quebec, and Save the Children. Canada's International Development Research Centre, and the Canadian Research Institute on Humanitarian Crisis and Aid. Let me also welcome our distinguished speakers, panelists, conference participants from across the country, and indeed, I'm pleased to say from around the world, both here with us, but also joining us by live webcast for at least the sessions that will be happening in this room. My name is Khalil Sharif. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Aga Khan Foundation Canada, and it is a really great delight and privilege to welcome you all this morning to the 2014 Canadian Humanitarian Conference, and to welcome you to the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat, where we'll be deliberating for the next couple of days. On behalf of the Aga Khan Development Network, especially Aga Khan Foundation Canada and Focused Humanitarian Assistance, which is the network's humanitarian agency, it is a great privilege to be co-hosting this conference with such distinguished institutions, and to be doing so at a time when crises, both natural and violent, seem to be engulfing us. Minister, thank you for making time to join us today. I know that you have seen firsthand in your travels how important and strong the work of Canada's humanitarian community is. And I want to tell you that the response to this conference is yet another example of the community's strength and its desire to continue strengthening itself. We have been sold out for at least 2 weeks with participation from across the country. And I can tell you that this is a community whose sense of purpose and urgency is palpable. Now, friends, we have in front of us 2 days of dialogue and learning, and I thought I might, with some humility but with boldness nonetheless, offer a few reflections on the things we might keep top of mind as we launch our deliberations. The first thing is that the speakers and participants who are collected here is truly remarkable. You'll see that from just a cursory review of the program that you've got in front of you. It represents a concentration of experience, expertise, and insight that we can all benefit from. And I hope everyone here will take advantage of the learning opportunities both in the formal sessions and in the informal ones. But I would urge you to push our speakers and our panelists to be action-oriented, to look at practical ways in which we can improve the way we work, and for us to commit ourselves to a series of action-oriented outcomes of our time together. The second issue I wanted to note is that the timing of this conference is propitious. We are in the midst of a number of global conversations that can be informed and shaped by our deliberations. The post-2015 development agenda will go through its final months of negotiation over the course of next year. We are in the middle of a World Humanitarian Summit process that will culminate in 2016. And in just a few weeks from now, the world will gather in Japan to refresh the framework for action on disaster risk reduction. So the opportunity for us to support these global conversations and eventually to shape global practice is uniquely present over the next couple of days. And finally, I wanted to linger for just a moment on what I understand to be one of the core challenges for our community. It is, of course, urgent and necessary for us to continually refine and improve our capacities to respond to crises around the world and here at home. But at the same time, I hope we can also bring the expertise and experience in this room constantly back to the question on how we improve our abilities to better predict, prevent, and mitigate the effects of crises as well. Indeed, it may be most incumbent on those who have the best knowledge and understanding of the effects of crises, of their dynamics, and of the methodologies for addressing them to bring the full weight of their insight to how we might avoid the consequences of crises altogether. The ethical case for prediction, prevention, and mitigation is clear to all of us who have witnessed firsthand the human misery of unavoided crises. The economic case is unassailable. Study after study has demonstrated the cost-effectiveness of early interventions. The World Bank estimates that investments in natural hazard early warning mechanisms can pay back up to 36 times. China has reported that $3 billion that it invested over the last 40 years in flood protection has yielded more than $12 billion in impact. And even ECHO cites that every euro spent on disaster risk reduction, they believe, saves between 4 and 7 euros in avoided cost. So the economic case is absolutely clear. And finally, the practical case. Our actual ability to make traction on this issue is perhaps more powerful today than it has ever been. We have seen countless opportunities to improve how well we predict and prepare for disasters. The innovations in technologies, policies, and social organization across government, business, and civil society are galloping forward in areas as diverse as construction methods, early warning approaches, micro-zoning and mapping capabilities for village and town planning, and a dizzying array of monitoring mechanisms for natural hazards, health outbreaks, even for social conflict. So we have perhaps never had so many practical tools at our disposal, ready for professionals such as the ones in this group to undertake the serious work of translating innovations to long-term programs of action for the most vulnerable. And I don't think this is an issue simply for one panel or for one keynote. I raise it now at the introduction of this session because it is my humble suggestion that it should be a background theme running through all of our deliberations over the next couple of days. So in sum, please accept my warm welcome and my aspiration that we will hold each other to high standards over the course of the next 2 days. First, to maintain a commitment to action-oriented outcomes. Second, to connect our conversations here with broader global processes. And third, to balance our focus on better response with a deep attention and commitment to prediction, prevention, and mitigation. So welcome to the conference and to the delegation. It is a great delight to have you all here. I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible over the next couple of days. And I will now have the great privilege of turning it over to my formidable colleague, Rosemary McCartney, the CEO of Plan Canada and chair of the Humanitarian Coalition, to bring greetings from the coalition and to introduce the minister. Rosemary.
Thank you, Khalil, for welcoming us to this beautiful home of the Aga Khan Foundation. It's a room full of light and air that we'll all enjoy over the next couple of days. Bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome, everybody. And I'm delighted as CEO of the Humanitarian Coalition and Plan Canada, and Oxfam Quebec and Oxfam Canada, and Care Canada and Save Canada, to introduce our Development Minister, Minister Christian Paradis.
Du chapeau. Pour le développement.
He's wearing two hats, one for development and one for francophonie. And it is the second aspect which has preoccupied him and kept him busy during the Francophonie Summit, which has recently been held. And
that was absolutely instrumental in the wonderful result of Madame Michaëlle Jean's successful election as president of the Organisation Internationale de Francophonie just last Sunday. And so I asked the minister this morning, was he still celebrating? It was a great victory, much due to him. Today, we welcome you home, Minister, to open this very significant conference, bringing together the best of Canada's humanitarian responders, many of whom come back from many parts of the planet, as well as distinguished international experts. Yesterday, Canadian experts met together in a special session for the day, the Canadian Humanitarian Response Network, and brought together in our annual general meeting. So it's a great week for humanitarian responders in Ottawa. C'est vraiment un grand plaisir pour nous.
And it is a great delight for us to welcome the Development Minister today. So thank you again, Minister, for being with us today.
The Minister for International Development for Canada and for la Francophonie, Christian Paradis.
Merci beaucoup, Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for those kind words. It's a great victory for Canada, as you say, during the weekend and on Sunday. It's a great honor, and I think we can all be very, very proud that we had a winning candidate and that she will now be in charge of the Francophonie.
To be here this morning in the beautiful home of Aga Khan Foundation. It's a privilege, and I'm very happy to be here to share this tribune with you. A little more than a year ago, I came into this portfolio, and as I said, but I have to repeat it, it was fresh from personally witnessing just how important humanitarian assistance is in the face of a disaster. Like Mégantic, this beautiful town that suffered terrible tragedy and saw the death of 47 of its people is in my writing of Mégantic l'Érable. So it gave me a very personal appreciation for the work that all of you do. And since then, my appreciation has only grown. I was there front hand right after, a few hours after the tragedy, seeing people in state of shock, looking for guidance, and could see people from the Red Cross very active on the ground from within the minutes following the tragedy. So I'm just thankful about that, and I don't hesitate everywhere I go all around the world to say how I am proud to be Canadian and have the privilege to be at the head of the ministry that support our humanitarian organizations to make sure that we do make a difference on the ground, addressing the needs of the people, deeply needs. Les travailleurs humanitaires canadiens.
Canadian humanitarian workers are on the ground day after day, year after year, and we know that they put their own lives in danger to help those who need them most.
Suffering from circumstances beyond their control reflect the best of Canadian values. When we all met at the first Canadian Humanitarian Conference a year ago, I'm sure none of us could have imagined the events that would unfold in the world this past year. The scale of the conflicts we have seen and their impact on the men, women, and children caught up in them is beyond anything the world has seen before. The number of natural disasters around the world has also risen. As we approach the end of 2014, it is safe to say that this year has been a particularly challenging one for the humanitarian community. In 2013, the Government of Canada contributed to humanitarian efforts in 54 countries, including Syria, the Central African Republic, and South Sudan. And we responded to 25 natural disasters, including Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and heavy floodings in Laos, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Dominica. And more recently, the Ebola crisis has been testing our collective ability to respond to our large-scale public health emergency and its humanitarian implications. Comme vous le savez, l'éclosion.
As you know, the outbreak in Western Africa has been unprecedented, and the consequence of that crisis has affected so many in that region of the world. But right from the beginning, Canada realized the risks of this outbreak, and we were among the primary donors and one of the first to contribute to the effort.
Topics to be covered in this conference deal with the consequences of this escalation of demand and how we can work in innovative ways for the greatest impact. And I am sure that the discussions over the next few days will help to shape the series of meetings leading into the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. I know that all of you bring rich experience and connections within the humanitarian community to that task. Canada is relying on all of you, academics, humanitarian actors, and NGOs to help find solutions and new approaches for a world that is sorely in need of your help. C'est important pour les Canadiens.
It's important for Canadians that we not abandon those who are in need. And as a nation, Canada has to provide humanitarian assistance that meets the most pressing needs of those populations who require it.
Help is a cornerstone of Canadian humanitarian assistance. And now, there is even greater onus on the international humanitarian community to reflect on how we can better address the needs of the people in situations of crisis. Conflicts in places like Syria, Iraq, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic have caused a large-scale displacement, and this has resulted in enormous protection issues for the civilian population. As you all know, these situations are tremendously complex. In situations of conflict, civilians continue to suffer the greatest consequences. Innocent people are routinely killed, raped, abuse, and exploitation are constant threats for women and girls. We must do more to protect civilians in these situations. We must strive to provide the best support we can to people affected by the violence. Intentionally preventing access to life-saving assistance is deplorable, and Canada will continue to be a strong voice that calls for full, safe, and unhindered access for humanitarian organizations. Safe access also means that acts of violence against humanitarian workers must stop. The beheadings by ISIS have been a sobering reminder of the growing risk faced by humanitarian workers. I am appalled that those whose mission it is to help others are so deliberately targeted, not just in Syria, but elsewhere. The loss of a single humanitarian worker is unacceptable, and Canada will continue to strongly condemn these acts. On ne peut pas le répéter assez, la perte d'une seule.
We cannot accept the loss of life of any humanitarian worker, and Canada will continue to strongly condemn these acts.
Just as the right of humanitarian access is often denied. As we strive to protect humanitarian space, the promotion of core humanitarian principles is critical. That is why Canada will continue to support partners who provide assistance and protection while respecting the principles of impartiality, neutrality, and independence of its humanitarian partners. Just as the challenges facing civilians living in the midst of the conflict have escalated, so have those of humanitarian workers. At the end of 2013, there were more than 23 million internally displaced people in the world. The number of refugees had reached 16.7 million. Half of them are children. These conflicts, as well as natural disasters, have placed huge pressure on the international humanitarian system, including donors, to respond in line with the level of need. Moving forward, our success will depend on our commitment to move beyond conventional approaches and become expert in adaptation and innovation. And I really like what Khalil just said about early measures. I think it has to be deeper explored in terms of opportunities it can provide to all. That said, innovation must go hand in hand with stronger partnerships, and we must all help drive this change forward. Le Canada s'associe depuis longtemps.
For a long time, Canada has helped civilian populations through various programs. We have invested in a number of activities that help civil society organizations. We cooperate with well-known and reputed organizations on the ground that have the skills to be able to act quickly and efficiently, and especially who have access to the beneficiaries. Our partners understand that UN humanitarian organizations, the Red Cross, and many Canadian organizations are essential.
Strategic partnership with the Canadian Red Cross to enhance humanitarian assistance, improving our ability to respond to emergency situations where lives are at stake and where every minute counts. One that aims of the partnership was to strengthen national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in developing countries so that they are better able to respond to disasters and conflicts. This partnership is about planning ahead for the inevitable, preparing for and mitigating risk, and there is no doubt that it has helped to improve Canada's ability to respond quickly and efficiently to humanitarian crises. Yet as the number of crises grows, resources are stretched as far as they can go. That is why it is essential to work together and build on each other's strengths. It is also critical to do more in a coherent manner. I believe that we not only need to rely on experienced partners, we need to engage new players. And Canada is committed to working with a wide range of stakeholders, including civil society, multilateral organizations, and other donors, exploring new partnerships, such as those with the private sector. By the way, I had the chance to co-chair a high-level Ebola roundtable in Africa when I was there last week. And I can say that two words came on and on. These words were solidarity and innovative partnerships. That's what we have to do to go beyond these crises. So together, we can find innovative solutions to pressing development and humanitarian challenges, to deliver concrete results for those most in need, especially women and children. And in this context, I am pleased to announce a project with the Humanitarian Coalition that aims to identify concrete areas for more collaboration between non-governmental organizations and Canadian corporations. Je suis heureux, donc, d'annoncer.
So I'm pleased to announce the implementation of a project with the Humanitarian Coalition, which is intended to find specific areas where we can increase cooperation between NGOs and Canadian society. This project will foster a better understanding of skills and abilities on each side. When we talk about intelligence, humanitarian intelligence, that is the kind of thing we're looking at. Through foreign affairs, the Humanitarian Coalition is carrying out research in a number of areas and also providing workshops to people that will be able to move forward through these two initiatives. This is the type of innovation that we have to encourage.
The protection of humanitarian space has become even more critical. For this reason, Canada will continue to stress the respect and promotion of the core humanitarian principles of impartiality, neutrality, and independence. Friends, I can tell you that as Canadian Minister of International Development, I am blessed to be able to count on you as stakeholder partners to make sure that we do a difference in the world. I'm proud to travel all around the world and being said that how Canada is good and efficient and generous in providing humanitarian aid, and it is because of your involvement. And I just must thank you all, and I have to send you this strong message that I want to work with you in the future. We need to find ways to be even more coherent and seeking innovative partnerships. So this conference is an opportunity to further strengthen our collaborative approaches and build the evidence base for future Canadian humanitarian action. I urge you to get the most out of the next 2 days by comparing notes and finding new ways to work together. There might be more challenges out there, but there is also incredible resources and good ideas here, so we can go beyond these challenges. Je vous encourage fortement à tirer pleinement.
So I strongly encourage you to get the most out of the next 2 days in finding the best ways to cooperate. Yes, we're facing challenges, but we can work together better, and we will be able to surmount those challenges.
Wow. Bonjour tout le monde. Wow.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really moved to see you all together in this wonderful atrium. This is the crowning of a work that we all accomplished for the purpose of organizing this conference and bring our community together. So I'm delighted to be here with you today and follow up after Khalil, who welcomed us today, and Rosemary, representing the members of the coalition, and Mr. Minister, thank you for your speech, which reminds us what motivates us. Thank you indeed, Minister.
Today, a little bit more than a year after our first attempt at a humanitarian conference, and I think what we really see here is the enthusiasm our community has for coming together on some of these issues. And so I'm humbled to see so many people here. And I know that we're going to have some pretty extraordinary conversations over the next couple of days. We are very much hosted here graciously by the Aga Khan Foundation, who are instrumental in the success of this conference and are one of a number of partner agencies. And I know Khalil listed them all off at the beginning, but the members of the Humanitarian Coalition believe very strongly in the need for community and in bringing people together. And we're very much determined to produce an event like this that gives us that opportunity to communicate and share and build together. In addition to that, this would not have been possible without the ongoing work and support of IDRC, which hosted the last conference, but also has been instrumental in supporting us as we've built this event today. And while their acronym is a little complicated, the OCA, l'Observatoire Canadien l'Observatoire canadien pour les crises et l'assistance humanitaire. Voilà. Vous voyez, je m'en suis souvenu. The acronym is
Remembered it?
But certainly represents one of the few think tanks we have in Canada that really does focus on humanitarian assistance. And we're glad to have them here as an academic component to the conference. And very significantly, the support of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Development has been very significant in us being able to hold this event today in such a beautiful venue as well. On est vraiment réunis aujourd'hui.
Today we're here together with the majority of Canadian humanitarian actors, which is not often the case, for the purpose of bringing forward a dialogue and a conversation for the purpose of helping people who suffer disasters, and we all share the same passion, each of us in this room, for the purpose of helping the people who are helpless in such situation, and we are brought together because we share such values. And I would like to remind us our commitment to this humanitarian action, and this is something which is different from development, and we'll be able to make this distinction during the next few days. And we are all united thanks to the principles that we share. And Mr. Minister, you mentioned this to us, and this is very important to us. These principles are extremely important to us. And this is a common passion for humanitarian principles, but I would like to add to this my own passion for our collective potential. This common potential is something which is huge, which hasn't been fully used and put to use. So this is why I would like to emphasize those objectives, because we are much stronger together. And this is what we'll be looking at today. And together we can overcome our differences, individual and institutional differences. Sometimes they do have to be taken into account.
Today, and we've heard some of that from Khalil and from the Minister and from Rosemary this morning. We'll hear much more about what we're facing collectively as a humanitarian community. Climate change and the increasing number of disasters affecting increasingly urban populations. I don't think I need to elaborate too much on that because we're going to be hearing a lot about it over the next couple of days. But that, I think, gives us really essential context for how important our conversations are going to be over the next couple of days. La semaine dernière, le vérificateur général.
Last week, the Canadian Auditor General published a report which, in its first chapter, mentions Canadian humanitarian assistance. And I must say that we perfectly planned this event, which followed right after it. So this is an important context, and it helps us in our conversation, not only for us in the country, but also for people who watch us from abroad. And this report gives us a very important and also self-sufficient perspective, which also unveils the essential role played by our government and by our country in such a context, and also submits a few recommendations which need to be taken into account, especially regarding the cardinal importance of acting fast and funding fast. And this is something which is of importance to us in the humanitarian community, because any delay is very costly, and this is something which is of primary importance for all of us in the humanitarian community. So we need to be able to act fast, because this is essential for us, because any delay costs lives. But as you can imagine, I follow very closely humanitarian development in Canada, and I believe that this report does place Canada right at the center of humanitarian assistance worldwide, and it does emphasize the contribution of our government, in particular its commitment for supporting humanitarian principles, and also recognizes the commitment of the federal government, Canadian federal government, for funding, for the purpose of funding requirements, and also as quickly as possible to our dependable partners. And this is something which we try to do very, very closely. And it is nice to have this recognized by a third party. And over the last 3 years, the Canadian government has allocated more than $566 million to humanitarian assistance. And also, as an aside, I would like to tell you that the weight of humanitarian assistance in development aid from Canada has increased, because it was only 6% in 2006, and it's now 14% from 6% in 2006. Dans le rapport sur l'aide humanitaire.
General's report last week, which really provided us, I think all of us as a community, a really important opportunity to underline and highlight the importance of Canada's humanitarian assistance to disaster survivors, and that it is and must always be guided by core humanitarian principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence, which it was, I think, wonderful also to hear you reiterate, Minister Paradis. I think for me, I was very much struck in that report how the first page actually allocated precious real estate to identifying those core principles. And I think that's very important for us, because these are the principles that bind us, we the humanitarian community. And we have to keep those in our heart as we go forward in the conversations that we pursue over the next couple of days. And it certainly has not gone unnoticed, Mr. Minister, that over recent years, you have made greater reference to the principles, and we have seen those more in government communications than perhaps we had in the past. You mentioned them last year at our conference, and you did so again today. And certainly, I think it does reveal, in fact, the placement of those core humanitarian principles at the core of the decisions that we make and need to make as humanitarians, and the allocation of funding according to needs and our actions defined by those interests. I think we all share the same goal to save lives and to preserve human dignity. The global humanitarian system has never been better equipped to deliver on that objective. And simultaneously, we've never seen so much human vulnerability. And certainly in absolute numbers, we've never seen the needs so great. And so we must do more. We have immense challenges ahead. And there's really no time to waste. We have to be moving on these things. We need to strive to have a greater impact. We need to operate more efficiently, all of us, and to live by our core humanitarian principles. I think I hope we'll hear a lot about those principles and how they influence our work over these couple of days. And to move forward, we need to understand what we do well. We need to acknowledge what we don't do so well. And we need to be able to do that so we can improve. And that means we need to look at our past and we need to examine our present, but we really have to be planning for the future and where we're going as a collectivity. And that is important, because we can be aware of our capacities individually, as agencies, within our organizations, but also collectively. And that's really something I hope will come out of this conference, this opportunity to do things together and to transcend some of our institutional barriers. And that's why I'm really so excited about these couple of days and this gathering. It really does give us a chance to perhaps extend beyond our comfort level, and on certain things. And so while Canada plays a leading role as a global humanitarian actor, and DFAT-D is among the top humanitarian donors, I must acknowledge also, our dynamic humanitarian community in Canada. We have, for example, and you heard Rosemary reference this, the Humanitarian Response Network in Canada, which the former pager, if you, there may be some slips over these couple of days, people still calling it pager. It's a recent name change, a good name change, and it has over 30 member organizations that are part of that. And that's extraordinary, because over the last 15 years or so of pager's existence, that went from, I think, around 8 when it was founded to over 30 today. And the Canadian government focuses significantly on humanitarian assistance, both through the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, but also through D&D. We have a number of universities in Canada that have developed humanitarian programs in various forms. You know, I can think off the top of my head of l'UQAM, of Guelph, of Laval, of McGill. We have a robust humanitarian M&E community in Canada that do monitoring and evaluation. A lot of consultants that are here in Canada. And Canadians have and still hold very prominent roles in the global humanitarian system. You know, and I think that is certainly worth underscoring. And to the point that the Minister has raised as well, our engagement with corporate Canada, there is a real role that corporate Canada does play in humanitarian response. It's an understated one. We don't know it as well as we should, hence the project that we're launching, but there is a role there. And it's a subject I look particularly forward to to speaking more about over the next couple of days, particularly tomorrow. Le Canada et ses acteurs.
Canada and its humanitarian actors have an important contribution to be made to the world and to the humanitarian system. And we are strongly anchored into humanitarian traditions, the French and Anglo-American traditions. So we straddle those both traditions and interests, and we're connected throughout the world with partners, and we're represented throughout the world again. So we have humanitarian values which flow from our national identity, which owe us the respect of the whole world. So we have every reason to be proud and motivated in our humanitarian work.
I think the shine comes off some of our community as dynamism, and I do want to speak to that a little bit, because my brief list of Canada's humanitarian actors is also a description, in some respects, of silos. I think we have wonderful circles that interact with each other and interact globally, but the links between Canada's humanitarian actors are weakened by geography, they're weakened by language, which put up barriers to our natural collaboration with one another. And Canada's humanitarian agencies, and let's acknowledge it, in many respects are exports from other countries, are franchises of global families. And you know, you can think of most of the big humanitarian agencies in Canada, and that will be true. And so a basic observation suggests that we spend more time engaging with our international counterparts perhaps than we do with each other. That may not be entirely true, but I think there's something to that. And so, you know, humanitarians in Canada really have too few opportunities to come together. I think the Humanitarian Response Network is a wonderful venue that allows for humanitarian practitioners to come together, but we need to extend that net a little bit further. And while the HRN has offered great opportunities for humanitarians over the years, I think that it's a restrained group, as it is, and we here hopefully are expanding that circle to include the academic community, to include humanitarians in other spheres, and the consultancy community, for example. You know, I unfortunately, I feel I have to argue that despite the capacity and knowledge we have in our sector and that we share in this country, that the level of dialogue on humanitarian issues has perhaps not been as strong as it could have been, that we don't do a lot of humanitarian research in Canada, for example. And these are areas where we could conceivably be improving. You know, until the Humanitarian Coalition initiated the first of these conferences last year with the wonderful collaboration and work with partners like OCA and IDRC, there literally had never been one in this country, which is hard to believe when you think about how humanitarianism is part of the Canadian ethos. We've superimposed that with our Canadian identity. And so it's wonderful to see these events now taking place. And I think whereas our colleagues in the international development community, and that is actually many of you, you know, are able to unite for immensely important initiatives like MNCH. Humanitarians perhaps have missed some opportunities to come together and to think seriously about what we want for our sector moving forward, and particularly faced with the number of challenges that we all do have. And I'm saying this because I think we need to be honest with ourselves about where we are, that we need to take this conference as a real opportunity to break down some of those barriers of time, of language, of geography, and sometimes short-term institutional priorities that we have, to build the humanitarian community that we need, that we all need to be able to improve and to move forward together. We all share the same goals, we share the same principles, and we have the same passion. So I think that we need to let that empower us to tackle the future together. I think one point that's significant for me, and certainly for the Humanitarian Coalition, is that we, I think, as a community, have fairly consistently failed to really engage the Canadian public, and at large, in a significant way, around what disasters are and how we engage as humanitarians, what our roles are, and you know, to use our collective resources to raise the awareness of the Canadian public, or of the private sector, about humanitarian needs and responses. I think we continue to be dependent on media coverage, and that's a reality. The level of coverage will depend how much we're able to fundraise, for example, or the interest we'll get from Canadians. The media coverage determines how worthy we are of donations, or how worthy disasters are of donations. We've now added to that also a dependence on, to some degree, on government matching funds, on which we have a mechanism over which we don't have a lot of influence, and that in fact you know, defines now increasingly how we engage with Canadians when disasters happen. And so resources, as you all know, need to be allocated based on needs. And it's our sector's responsibility to advance that objective. And so I explicitly point out here the role of NGOs who are represented here as separate from the government, his own equally strong responsibility in this area. We as NGOs also need to take responsibility for that. But when a tough crisis happens, like we saw for Syria and continues to this day, we have struggled as a community to really engage with the public, to actually get our messages out about what it is that we're doing, what it is that we need, and how we should move forward together. And you know, I think Syria is a good case in point, but you could look at Gaza this last year as well, our inability to really engage on that specific crisis with our public. And so, you know, the Syrian crisis was fascinating to me because in the summer of 2013, in Germany, all of German NGOs, all of the UN agencies present, a number of government agencies, blacked out their websites for a day of solidarity. They knew they couldn't actually fundraise because it's a conflict and that's a challenge, but they actually showed that solidarity together. We seem to be unable to unite in that way. And so I think us all here today, hopefully some of the coffee, over coffee conversations will help, maybe elucidate some ways that we might be able to move forward. And I would tell you that while all this is happening, we continue to see slow but continuous decreases of public trust levels for nonprofits generally, and including in the international sector. And that's what surveys tell us of the Canadian public. And that's, despite this, all our methods mostly remain the same. And you'll forgive me for saying so, but I think it means that we're perhaps a little bit too comfortable in the passenger seat about some of these issues. And perhaps I'm alone, and feel free to contradict me a little bit later. But I do see need for change with respect to this, and I think that we could try to squeeze ourselves into the driver's seat on certain things. And so I think old ways do, in many cases, need to change, and they won't cut it for the future, certainly with the crises that are multiplying and getting more complex. If we're going to have to be talking to Canadians more about crises like Syria or Central African Republic, I'm not sure the methods of the past are going to work for that. And southern capacity is rapidly scaling up. Our sector is going to see tremendous structural changes over the coming years at the global scale. But what does that mean for us here in Canada? And for you and your work, and simultaneously, Canadians are demanding more information and more transparency from us and the organizations they support. Religious attendance is actually decreasing in Canada. What does that mean for donations? It means that overall we can expect those to go down. And so, our sector is threatened with that, and there really is a need for us to think about how we plan to respond to that. I don't think we can stand by with expectations that the same old approaches will continue to apply. And so there's a long list of things I'd like to see our Canadian humanitarian community do. I certainly think starting with raising awareness around the humanitarian principles and the role of humanitarian assistance. Better advocating for change. When we see that humanitarian space, as you identified, Minister Parody, is threatened, or the humanitarian actors are threatened, producing more evidence to support impactful change. healthy dialogue in our country about humanitarian practice, about policy. And this relates to research and how little we actually do here in Canada. Talking seriously about how funding and communications can be improved at a systematic level. These are things that I hold dear, as I do innovation in all spheres. And I think that relates to partnerships, to the private sector, to financing, to public engagement. There are so many things we haven't explored that we could be doing together. And so all of these are perhaps lofty objectives. They sort of suit me. For those of you who know me, you'll know that suits me. In fact, if you do know me, you know that to the really, lofty objectives that we have at the HC to reinvent how Canadian humanitarian engagement takes place with the limited resources that we have. I also decided to sign up to an MBA recently. I just figured I'd pile it all on. But one of the things that I have been sort of faced with is the fact that outside of our community, we have to face an interesting sort of image deficit with respect to ourselves. Surrounded by corporate culture, I realized that we are actually perhaps faced with a little bit too much inside-out thinking, and that we would do well with a little bit of outside-in thinking. And, sorry, that's from one of my marketing classes. So, I mean, can we as Canadian humanitarians be more bold? Can we be bold enough to build a better future? I think perhaps. Certainly, to do that, we're going to need to break down silos. But I do want to take up the challenge that Minister Parody, you shared with us last year, and you shared with us again this year. I only had your speech from last year, so to quote it, you said, moving forward, our success will depend on our commitment to move beyond conventional approaches. Constant adaptation and innovation will be essential. And I can't agree with that more, and I don't think anyone here can disagree. In fact, I think innovation is essential, and they are also achievable. One of the things that we did this year, and it's a modest achievement, but it's a significant change, is together with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Canadian Humanitarian, the Coalition, the Humanitarian Coalition, launched a Canadian Humanitarian Assistance Fund, which is a small fund to address rapid onset, small-scale disasters where our member agencies are best placed to respond. And that's a truly innovative way to address issues around timeliness, about best-placed agencies to respond, maximizing humanitarian outcomes, and responding to disasters that otherwise we couldn't respond to. Frankly, that are too small, we can't fundraise for, we can't find funding for. This is innovation, and I think it's taking us outside of our comfort zone, and builds on some of the great work that the Red Cross had done setting up its Emergency Disaster Assistance Fund as well. And so, who says only the British can do humanitarian innovation? I think we can do it here too. And so I think the CHAF is a phenomenal achievement in and of itself. It's one of many innovations I'm sure we'll learn of over these couple of days. I know I'm speaking beyond my time, and that's fair. I did want to say just a couple of things, and I'll have to move to housekeeping. You'll notice some significant changes on this conference over last year's conference. What we took from the feedback last year, which was really just a pilot, a test to see if our community wanted these events, what we heard was produce something more professional, something more engaged. Well, I think you see that here today. But I would also say there have been some big changes in terms of the way that you're going to be engaging through the different panels. We have here received panel submissions as opposed to papers. And so each panel is a coherent whole. They have specific directions, as Khalil identified at the beginning as well, about speaking to outcomes. And we'll be doing that. We've got some webcasting happening in the main hall. We've got a superb space, and we're holding this over 2 days. At the end, it's important to note there will be an outcome document from this conference, and so each of these sessions is actually there are notes being taken, being distilled at the end, and that will be compiled. And very significantly, one of OCA's important contributions to this conference and linking us to the academic sphere is that there will be a special edition of the Canadian Journal for International Development, and that's receiving specific papers related to this conference. And so that will be published. As you know, academic papers take a while to publish, so it'll be over the next year that will come out. But an important connection. Cette conférence coïncide aussi, et c'est très important.
This conference coincides, and I want to emphasize it again, coincides with two important elements. First of all, Canada is becoming a co-chair of the Co-Prevention Donorship Initiative, and also we will be contributing to the World Summit that will take place in 2016 in Turkey. And these are two opportunities for us to be committed into these conversations at the community. This is why it was so important for us to make sure that this conference could enable us to commit each of us to explain the interest of each of our community, members of the communities, because we didn't want to claim that we would be submitting or presenting a Canadian stand at the World Humanitarian Summit, but we wanted each of the panel to address the question. And we sent you a survey through email, which is also in your kits. So we need you to answer this survey today, because tomorrow, during the last session, we'll be analyzing your comments and we'll be sharing the results of the survey or what you think of the Humanitarian World Summit in order to have a conversation on it together. So we need to know what your specific interest and stake is in that summit. So I'm speaking way beyond the time that has been allotted to me.
I have a long list of them, but given how many we are here, I'm sure you'll understand. There are 3 rooms where these sessions are taking place. This is the atrium. The resource library is behind the glass there. So that's room B. The seminar room, room C, is in the back corner that way. Okay? So when you're looking for the places where you're going, these are the 3 rooms. This room is webcasted, and all sessions here will be webcasted. We have simultaneous interpretation in this room and in the library behind the glass. The 3rd room does not have interpretation, but so you're aware you have access to that interpretation in both languages, and we're very happy to be able to offer that here at this conference. There is significant social media activity happening, and so certainly use the Twitter hashtags and so on. There are specific ones for each of the sessions. If you don't feel like you want to get up to a microphone to ask a question, you can tweet about it using the hashtag for that session. There will be people monitoring that. We'll be able to pick those up. So that's actually in the programs, and you can pick up those panel-specific hashtags, while of course hopefully tweeting furiously for the conference as a whole. There is Wi-Fi available throughout the conference, and I understand you've got access to that here. If you need to have bilateral meetings, you need to step away and you need to have a meeting, that is possible. There are side rooms available for that. For that, you would need to reserve that room with the concierge service, which is behind you here, near the main doors, and the concierge can organize that for you. If you have any issues with respect to the conference, anything you need to find out, you need to call a taxi. Concierge is your key person for that. I mentioned in French, but I'm saying it again, the importance of filling out the survey that you were given for the Canadian around the WHS, the World Humanitarian Summit. We are using your feedback to produce the final session out of this conference. We need you to fill that out so we can tell you what you're telling us and confront you with that. It will also all be compiled at the end as part of the outcome documents for this. There are a few ways you can do this. You actually have a link to be able to do it, if you want to do it on your phone or a tablet. You have a physical copy in the package you've been given. Please bring that to one of the organizers. I don't see the World Humanitarian Summit table, but I'm sure we'll have one set up at one point. And just finally, a couple of points. The washrooms are behind me down the stairs. There's large washrooms downstairs. Upstairs, there's only individual washrooms. So if you're looking, this is where you need to go. Lunch will be served at 12, and it will be in this room at 12:30 tomorrow. There is no smoking on this property, for anyone who was wondering. And we do have a very full agenda. So please do try to stay on time. People will be trying to stay on time. You don't follow my example on this. That's fair. And just a final thing I'd like to say is a huge, huge, huge thank you to all the volunteers, to all the organizers that were behind this. To have an event like this, it's not just a few people that had, did some work. There's some extraordinary work that's been done by the volunteers, and I'd like to just maybe give them a round of applause and use that as our close. I think that's it for now for me, and so I'll be introducing you to Nick Harvey. Nick Harvey is here to speak to us from the World Humanitarian Summit, and he's he's the thematic coordinator for the WHS. And before joining the WHS, he was head of Humanitarian and Disaster Resilience Policy Team at DFID in the UK. but in his present role, he's leading all of these consultations with the WHS. And as such, he'll walk us through some updates about the WHS and where it is today. And this is very important because this is how we are bookending this conference, and your engagement is going to be feeding into the WHS process. So, Nick, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful to be invited to this conference. Dr. Jamila Mahmood, who's the head of the World Humanitarian Summit Secretariat, regrets that she can't be here today, but she wanted me to convey that she sees this as one of the most important meetings that will feed into the regional consultation that will be held in Budapest in February, and for the broader preparations for the summit itself. And she very much looks forward to hearing the ideas and thoughts that are generated, and I very much look forward to engaged in some of these detailed panel discussions that will happen over the next few days. Nick has asked me to really cover sort of two issues. One is to give you a bit of a snapshot of the process and where we are at the moment. And then also to give a bit of a sense of some of the emerging issues that have appeared from some of the discussions that we've had, both from the regional consultations, but also from the thematic consultations as well. But I think just to start the process, I thought I'd give you a reminder of the objective of the summit. And I apologize for those at the back who may not be able to read it, but this is a quote from the Secretary General, who stated that we need a truly global and innovative humanitarian system in which everyone plays their part, and that is why we are convening the first ever World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in May 2016. And I think the key issue is here, and as has already been raised this morning, is how do we tackle some of the big challenges we have in the future. So, first of all, again, I'm afraid a slightly detailed slide, but a bit of an idea of the process and where we are at the moment. You will see on the right-hand side the summit itself, which happens in May 2016. That may seem like a long way off, but in reality, for us certainly in the Secretariat, it's not, because we have a number of milestones in advance of this, which mean that we really have a lot of detailed work to do in the coming months. And one of the kind of key milestones is this global consultation that happens in October next year, and will be a sort of core opportunity to test out some of the initial ideas and thoughts that have been generated from these three, in a sense, the sort of three core processes that we're taking forward at the moment. One is a set of regional consultations, and I will talk a bit more about those in a minute. Another is the thematic consultations, and we have 4 thematic teams, which I'm sure you're aware of, one on humanitarian effectiveness, one on reducing vulnerability and managing risk, one on innovation, and one on conflict. And then we also have an online consultation and a set of other consultations that we are now taking forward. So, for example, we have a consultation now on civil-military affairs, which will take place in Singapore in April. We're also having a big conference that both the US and ALNAP are organizing on humanitarian effectiveness that will happen in June. So all of these processes are coming together, and we will then generate a synthesis report, which will then feed into this global consultation, which will happen in October in Switzerland, and give us the first opportunity of really to sort of test out some of the ideas that will be that were generated, both as a vision of some of how do we address humanitarian issues of the future, but also some of the emerging recommendations in terms of what needs to happen in terms of delivering that. And then that will then form into a Secretary General's report, which will then go into the summit itself in May 2016. So in terms of the regional consultations, we've so far undertaken 3, and we have 5 more, which will happen pretty well every month from February. And these are really providing a very rich source of information and on the perspectives within the regions in terms of their own ideas and their own challenges and their own constraints in terms of addressing humanitarian issues. And what we're also trying to do is make sure these processes are very well linked up with the thematic side of our work, so that we have the ability to test and use the regional consultations to test ideas and thoughts, so that we can then develop them further, so that we can mature them in advance of the process as it moves forward. So that we've undertaken 3 so far, and at the table behind the screen here, some of the co-chair summaries have been, the co-chair summaries for those have been put out, which are also on our website. And as I mentioned, we have this, the next one is in Budapest, and which is covering what is called Europe and Others, which is not a very dignified way of talking about various other parts of the world, including Canada, but it includes 67 different countries. I'm sure that name could probably be improved somewhat. But I think this will be a very interesting conversation, because it needs to deal with both domestic issues and some of that exist within that region, but also obviously the external international engagement that you all have in other parts of the world. So getting that balance right is particularly important. And I think it's also important to say that it's not just a case of undertaking a regional consultation and saying thank you very much, we'll see you next the summer in 2016. We've set up these regional steering groups in each of the regions, and they will play then an active part in terms of taking stock of the findings that happen in other regional consultations and as our thoughts develop, in order to be able to then feed back amongst the wider people within their region, but also to actually try and take forward some of the recommendations into actually and trying to see if we can actually deliver some of them in advance of the summit itself. So that's a bit on the process, and I will be around over the next 2 days. If you've got further questions about some of the different elements, I'm very happy to take them up. And now a bit on some of the emerging issues that we're coming from, which we've found so far, both from the regional consultations and also from some of the thematic discussions. And there's 7 of them that I want to highlight. So the first is on prioritizing people most vulnerable to or suffering from acute humanitarian distress, to help them better cope, adapt, and recover quickly from shocks, and to do so in dignity. And this is very much this sort of issue of putting people very much at the center of both preparedness and response. So there's a number of sort of core issues that are appearing on here. One is the issue of strengthening the accountability and collective engagement of all stakeholders to assist and protect these people, and in particular the states themselves and their responsibilities. The second is understanding better the specific needs and contexts, the specific needs of affected people and their contexts, in order to tailor assistance and protection better. And then a third element is giving people a stronger voice in the design and delivery of the support, and also the whole idea of giving them greater choice. So issues like cash transfers and the ability to scale those up. The second issue is around localizing preparedness and response. And I think Nick mentioned a bit earlier the growing rise in the number of southern organizations engaged in this. But I think what we've heard very, very clearly from all the regional consultations is that the call for localizing humanitarian response is getting ever louder. And I think it's very interesting. In one of the pre-consultation surveys that we undertook in advance of the North and Southeast Asia consultation, 79% of survey respondents felt that local national actors responded most effectively. So I think that, and there's a number of other statistics pointing to the role and perceptions of localized responses. So I think there's an issue of how do we, ideas of how do we shift to finance, for example, to regional, national and local support for preparedness and response. And there's been quite a lot of discussion about how do you cut out the middlemen. And there's, if you look at some of the situations where you have donors providing finance to the UN, who provide it to the international NGOs, who provide it to national NGOs, who provide it to local NGOs. There's a lot of layers that have to take place there. So are there opportunities to address that? I think the other important part here is how do you also have increasing finance from the development and climate change community in order to support the building up of capacities as well, and also issues like building up and scaling up social protection. Another part of this, and one of the things that have been raised, is how is it also feasible in certain environments for the international humanitarian community to adopt exit strategies for all but the most catastrophic events? And are there opportunities, for example, to take on a bit more the discipline of that comes from the insurance industry, and actually seeing, what kind of layers that the humanitarian community should engage in, with a hope that both the national players really take the responsibility for all but those most catastrophic events. So how can one incrementally do that? And obviously there is then broader links with the work that is being taken, for example, through the HFA and the SDGs. The third element is building resilience to protracted crisis in fragile and conflict-affected environments. So part of this is addressing the fragmentation of effort, and how do you try and get a greater coherence, a greater coherent approach to risk management. And I think there's been, again, a sort of increasing interest in this over the last few years, particularly with the sort of rise of the resilience agenda. And you're seeing, for example, now situations where you have joint risk analysis and planning, such as, for example, recent exercises that have happened in the DRC. Just a few weeks ago, there was a whole planning on stabilization strategy for Lebanon, which brought both humanitarian development and other characters together to look at how they can operate more effectively together. So there's been quite a lot of call for more multi-year humanitarian finance, but it's also a question of how do you bring in more the development finance into these situations. And again, there's been sort of experience, for example, within Lebanon of trying to get a bit more engagement and investment in the stabilization situation and tackling certain sectors like education. So how can that situation, how can the engagement of the development world be scaled up, whether in particular sectors or more generally? And also how can the development world be more engaged from the start of a crisis, yet have the flexibility to be able to adjust and respond as situation changes. So I think there's a very big interest in, can the summit try and deal with this conundrum that we've been fighting with for the last 20 years of this humanitarian development divide? And I think a close look at some of the incentives and issues that need to be addressed is particularly important. The fourth issue is around conflict and reinforcing humanitarian action in situations of conflict. And I think we've heard quite clearly from the Minister and others this morning some of the major constraints and challenges faced both in, for example, the continuing lack of respect of international humanitarian law, some of the the continuing access challenges faced, and the heightened insecurity of aid workers. So I think it is a question of how, measures and opportunities for getting parties to respect international humanitarian law, that humanitarian agencies cannot be a substitute. And I think there was very much a strong call, which I think has been very much pointed out by Nick earlier on, a strong call within the regional consultations for humanitarian principles to be very much seen as fundamental for effective response. It's also important to look at need to find new ways to get parties to a conflict to ensure that people in need of humanitarian assistance and protection have access to them, including by facilitating the access of humanitarian organizations. And in the regional consultations, there's been a very close interest in, for example, the experience of the Kampala Convention and the potential opportunity of both its rollout within Africa, but also potentially adapting it to other environments. The next issue is on finance and being financially fit and agile, and addressing what is very much seen as a growing finance gap that exists as we see needs rise, but resources, though they've raised recently, have very much, in some ways, been stagnating over the previous years. So there's, but I think we need to be, need to look at how do we diversify the humanitarian finance base. And one of the issues we're looking at, for example, is the issue of Islamic finance and what are the opportunities there. How do we channel funds directly to local actors? How do we increase the speed and scale of resources to meet mega disasters? And I'm sure some of you will have heard Antonio Guterres talking about the possibility of a super surf. There's also how do we invest more in preparedness? There's been a whole set of studies recently on the fragmented nature of preparedness finance. And again, are there opportunities to get some clarity and movement on that? And also trying to tackle some of the blocks to finance, particularly in conflict situations. And I refer to, for example, some of the examples of where counterterrorism legislation has affected the funding in certain environments. Two more issues, and I shall be very quick about it. One is making the international humanitarian system more adaptable and better suited for the new generation of crises. So how do we recalibrate the international humanitarian system to those changing realities? How do we, the possibility of looking at focusing where it's mission critical, particularly conflict and catastrophic disasters, increasingly engaging different actors, and looking at the conditions for innovation, such as scaling up proven measures like cash transfers, but also looking at how do we adjust to the rising levels of urban risk. And then just lastly is understanding the risk and economics of response. We've been certainly pushed very hard by Valerie Amos, who you'll see tomorrow, to really actually probe and make sure that we've got very strong evidence on the current financial, the current financial situation and the scale of the financing gap. And in order to really probe that and really to look also at the elements of transparency of finance, but also the value for money of the responses that exist at the moment. And also the links on understanding risk, how do we get much greater links with the likes of the science, data and modeling community to enhance anticipation and preparedness. So there's just a few, 7 elements which are beginning to appear. Clearly we will need to take those up and further elaborate them into terms of specific recommendations and ideas, and obviously then use the regional consultations that I've mentioned in order to be able to start turning these into potential recommendations. I will leave it there and I very much look forward to engaging with you over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. If you thought that was a lot of information to absorb, wait until Friday evening. I'd like to thank all our keynote speakers. We will now transition into a break. We have 15 minutes. We will reconvene here in the atrium at 10:30 sharp for a keynote panel entitled Responding to Emergencies in the Most Difficult Places. Surely to be a provocative discussion. So fill up on coffee, grab some bites, and we'll see you at 10:30. Thank you.